podcast, we will interview alumni and supporters from far and wide, and they will share some insights from their school days and involvement with St George's School. Welcome, listeners, to our Centenary podcast for St George's School. And today it's great pleasure that I'm introducing you to Mr Dave Cole. Dave was a St George's Old Boy from 1955 to 1958, and his Old Boy number is 786. He was Ferguson House. He was also a Wanganui Collegiate School Old Boy and a past college board trustee. His father also attended St George's from 1931 to 1934, and his number is Old Boy 118. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Julie.
And we also have our two wonderful Year 8 students, Jayden and Oliver Hume. Welcome, boys. Jayden and Oliver are going to ask Dave a few questions today, and then, Dave, you might have a few vignettes you'd love to share with us a little later through the podcast. So I'll hand over to you, Oliver.
What years were you at the school and what brought you to St George?
I was there from 1955 to 1958, but my father had been an early student there. Of course, the school started in 1927, but he started in 1930 or 31, and he was there for about 4 years. So why did I go there? Well, I guess because my father had been there, and also my parents decided that it would be good for me to have an experience of an independent school with, for example, learning languages and so on, which weren't on offer at the St John's Hill School where I'd been previously.
Can you describe a typical day during your time at St George's?
Yes, well, because back then in the 1950s and from its inception, St George's was basically a boarding school. And when I started there, I think there were about 120 students, only about 35 day boys, so we were a bit in the minority. So as far as the day concerned, I had to get to school from St John's Hill School, so I biked down, and with some friends that also lived up there. So we arrived at school. I think we had an assembly first thing every morning, and then we went off to class. Then we had a break in the morning, we had lunch, and after a few years my parents decided that I could have lunch with the boarders. There was a small group of day boys that used to have lunch with the boarders in the dining hall. So I did that. Then afternoon back to class. I don't think there was an afternoon break, but we finished about 3, and then we had after school activities, sport of course being one of them. And the major one in the summer it was cricket, and for me I also was a reasonably good swimmer, so I did swimming in the summer as well. And in the winter it was rugby. There weren't really any other winter choices for sport, so that was the day. Then we cycled home, and a little story that I thought of was one time we were pushing our bikes up Springvale Hill because it's quite steep. Our bikes didn't have gears in those days. And there was a big clay bank near the top of the hill. We noticed that a couple of people had carved their initials on the clay. So we stopped and carved our initials on the clay and rode off home. Well, the next day we found that somebody had spotted us doing this in our St George's uniforms, and I think the headmaster had gone up there to see whose initials they were, and the 4 of us were called into his office and given a little bit of a dressing down. But what he said has always stuck with me all these years later. He said, "Fools' names like fools' faces appear in public places." And so we were suitably admonished. So that was the day at school.
A good lesson learned, I would say.
Yes, yeah.
Do you have any favourite memory or memories that captures the spirit of the school?
Well, I suppose the spirit of the school is probably very much what it is today. It was a very sort of broad education. Apart from doing our lessons in class, we had other activities like singing. We had a choir, which I wasn't in. My singing was never that good. And we had chapel, of course. During my time there, an extension was built on, so we could have a proper little chapel extension on the end of the hall. So yeah, that was all sorts of things which I think you boys and girls still enjoy these days.
Fantastic. Oliver?
If you could speak to the current students, what advice would you give them?
Well, I think really is to make the most of all the opportunities you have. There are a lot of out-of-class activities which I'm sure you engage in, and really have a go at everything. That's what I found, and I tried to do that. I wasn't very good at some of the things I had a go at, but at least I had a go. And then later in life, you might find that something back then has sort of tweaked an interest, and you can go back to it. So that would be my advice.
What does the Centenary mean to you personally?
Well, of course, because my father was a very early student, wasn't there quite 100 years ago, the Centenary means a lot. And I'm hoping that with the Centenary, we're able to attract a lot of students back that haven't, ex-students back that haven't been to the school and certainly haven't seen it in its new environment on the collegiate campus. And note that all the extra things that you have available to you, the facilities that the collegiate has on this campus. I've found with reunions that I've been to for collegiate over the years, I've caught up with some boys that I was at school with who I hadn't seen since I left school. For one reason or another, they moved overseas or so. So I'm hoping that there's going to be an opportunity for past students to catch up with old friends from way back.
What was your favourite year at school and why?
Well, I think my first year was very interesting because I started in what was then Standard 3, I suppose, Year 5. And my teacher that year happened to be a cousin of my father's. His name was Mike Bignell. And he had only left collegiate about a year or so, and he was looking to see if he wanted to go into school teaching. So he became my form teacher. And because he wasn't that much older than me, it took me a while to get used to calling him Sir instead of Mike. But the other thing about that year was that Mike's friend from collegiate days also had the same idea. He'd been out of school for a year or so, and his name was Alan Cooper. Now that's him there in that photo there, and that's my dad's cousin Mike there.
So listeners, Mr. Cole's sharing a staff photo from 1952, and we'll make sure that we pop that in our publications with this podcast.
Yes, so Mr. Cooper, of course, became a headmaster of St. George's for much later, and he was a very successful and well-respected headmaster. I think he introduced computers into St. George's School during his time. So that was my first year. The other next 2 years, well, I can't really remember a lot about them, but the year I really do remember was my last year in 1955. And that year, I ended up in a small class of 8 boys. And I've got the photo of them here, and I'll just run through and name them and explain why there was this class. It was a Form 3 class. Now, these 8 boys here, David Williams, Hugh Gilbert, Ian Hay Campbell, Tony Hunt, that's me there, Gordon Allen, Kim Bruce Lockhart, whose father was the headmaster at collegiate at the time, and Howard Brasted. Now, 5 of the boys had been in Form 2 at St. George's the year before, but they were too young to come on to collegiate. Their birthdays were early in the year and so on. They would have only been 12 when they started. So it was decided that they should go into a class and sort of on hold for a year. But to make up the numbers, the other 3 of us, myself, Bruce Lockhart and Brasted, had been in Form 1 the year before. So we were added to the class. Now, know that Bruce Lockhart and Brasted were very bright, so they were probably top of the class. Perhaps I came third, so I was the one to pick up. But that was a very memorable year because we had a wonderful teacher, who you can see there, Mr. Rodney Gould. It was his first year of teaching. He'd actually trained as a lawyer, but he had a hearing problem, so he had to give that up and took up teaching. But he was a wonderful teacher. And he took us for most of our subjects, I think, except for science, which the headmaster took. But he taught us Latin and French, which we hadn't learned before. And that was good preparation for collegiate. And he taught us songs and poems in Latin and French. But really, it was a wonderful year. And all those eight of us remained close friends, although sadly, two of them died quite young, and another one died about 10 years ago. But the other five of us that are still around keep in regular touch, even though one of them lives in the UK and one of them lives in Australia. But they've been back here for various collegiate reunions, so it was sort of lifelong friendships were forged there. So that was my best year there.
Very special memories. And let's hope you do get to catch up at the Centenary if we can get you all together. It'd be lovely. I have a question. Now, I've heard ballroom dancing and boxing were quite some highlights at St George's back in the day. Anything to add there, Dave?
Yes, well, I'll start with the boxing. It was one of the sort of extra activities we did, but we had a boxing coach called Mr. Bill Banning, and it was most enjoyable. And I've got a photo here, actually, which was taken some years ago when St George's moved over to this campus. And Mr. Walborn, who I think you've met, yes, and my good friend Tony Hunt, who was in that third form class, we were a small group who went over and collected all the memorabilia out of the building. And one of the things we found was the old boxing ring. And that used to be set up each year in the boxing time in the what they called big school over there. So I took that photo, and that's got my friend Tony Hunt and my other friend Walborn pretending to box in the old boxing room.
Love it. Listeners, I will put that in our publications with this podcast as well. It's a great photo.
Yes. And of course, Bill Banning, there was a trophy presented some years after he retired for boxing, but I think it's now given to somebody who shows an all-round development.
Yes,
so it's still awarded, which is great.
At prize giving at the end of each year. Yes, how lovely to have some connection with that trophy. Thank you.
Now, the ballroom dancing, that was another story. We had a ballroom dancing teacher called Mrs. Colway. Now, she was a distant cousin of my father's, and her son, Don Colway, came to St George's sometime after me and came on to collegiate. And, of course, he's now the organist in the chapel here.
Yes, and he's played for some of our chapel services, which is just so special as well.
Yeah, so that was another thing.
How lovely. Boys, any other questions from you that you've been pondering?
What life lessons did St George's teach you that you use in your everyday life?
Well, I think being organised and self-discipline, although discipline was imposed on us quite strictly in those days, and also forming friendships and being able to retain friendships over a long period of time. But, all sorts of life lessons, I think.
Thank you. Boys, thank you so much for your insightful questions to Mr. Cole today. Well done. So, Dave, any vignettes? You've shared with us a few already in your answers to the boys' questions, but anything else that you'd like to share, a funny moment or something that stayed with you over the years with your association, your long association with St George's School?
I suppose, going back to my father's time there, I sort of added this in a bit earlier, he was at school with a number of boys that became lifelong friends, and two of them were the Austin twins, Bill and Jeff. Now, Jeff Austin, of course, later became headmaster, and he became headmaster in my time. So that, I guess, was a little bit of a difficult situation, being such close friends with the Austin family when he became headmaster. But I might have benefited a little bit from that connection. I'll never know, because although I wasn't very good at cricket, I did enjoy the game. And on a couple of away fixtures, one to Herewith and one to Huntly, Mr. Austin appointed me as the 12th man and scorer. And I think perhaps it might have been because he knew I was good at maths, so I could add the scores up. But those were great. You students these days enjoy away trips and make friends. But I met boys at both Huntly and Herewith that later came on to collegiate and became lifelong friends.
How wonderful. And in a couple of weeks we're heading to Herewith for an overnight exchange for our winter sports. So it's lovely to see that that's continued.
But another story that did spring to mind was I was riding up the drive one morning on my bike on the way to school, and I noticed there was a boy running along beside the driveway. And all of a sudden he veered out onto the drive and crashed straight into my bicycle. And he got quite a nasty cut on his leg. Well, unfortunately, it was the day of the athletic sports, and this boy was quite a good runner, but he wasn't able to compete that day. So I felt a bit guilty about this. But anyway, I was told that it wasn't my fault. He was actually chasing a butterfly, and the butterfly took off across the road, and he charged after the butterfly and didn't even see me on my bike. So that was one little, amusing story, but not so amusing for him.
Well, look, Dave, thank you so much for having this wonderful time sharing your insights and time with St George's. We really want to thank you for the many years of service that you have provided to the school and the shared campus with St George's and Wanganui Collegiate School. And I look forward to seeing you at the Centenary coming up, with the calendar of events that we've got coming through to next year. And obviously in regard to some of the planning as well around that Centenary, your insights would be most welcome. So thank you so much. Thank you, Jayden. Thank you, Oliver, for your wonderful questions today. And listeners, I'm sure you have enjoyed this podcast, and we look forward to sharing the next one in a little while. Thank you.
Just to conclude, though, thank you for the opportunity. But I will say, you mentioned my sort of contribution to the two schools. It's something that I think all students, when they leave their schools, should think about when they have time later in life, about giving something back. And, that's what I've felt I've been able to do in some small way. So thank you, Julie.
How lovely. Thank you, Dave.